Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review, so hopefully you find this one interesting. This movie is a horror film from the United States, English language, released in the year 2019, directed by Joe Begos, and this film was called Bliss. So Bliss is about a very creative artist. She has to have a piece ready for an exhibition that's coming up very soon, but she has creative block, and so she doesn't know what to do, and she's becoming very frustrated. So one day she's at a party, and she comes across a friend who's a drug dealer who gives her a drug called Bliss. Bliss is said to release a lot of stress, and this is where the creative process is going to come through, hopefully. So she takes Bliss, but then she realises that although she is actually getting some ideas for her creative art, she's also starting to go on a hellish journey into what she believes is a descent into hell, and this is where she starts to develop a thirst for blood. And so she realises that if she doesn't actually fix what's going on, those around her could be in grave danger. So whether or not she actually fixes this problem and discovers the truth behind Bliss in time is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Bliss. I was highly anticipating this horror film. I was actually really excited because I'm a massive fan of Joe Begos. Now Joe Begos created films called Almost Human and In the Mind's Eye. Now this is a director that is definitely one to look out for, because I believe he's a true fan of horror films. Is that he makes horror films, but he's inspired by films of yesteryear. So he's a student of the genre, and this is not something you see every day. So that's the reason why I really appreciated Almost Human and In the Mind's Eye, because although they weren't great films, they were still movies that reminded me of films previous. And so just a trip down memory lane. They're nostalgic sort of horror films. And so coming into Bliss, I was wondering what Joe Begos was actually going to send me through in this experience. This is a more hardened experience because it actually got an R18 rating here in Australia, whereas his other films have an MA15+. Although his other films were pretty hardcore as far as violence is concerned, Bliss seemed a step above that. And so I was anticipating a horror film that was really going to test my limits. And that's exactly what I got with Bliss. Although this movie has problems, I thought it was still a very, very impressive experience. It's an experience that I'd recommend to everybody who is a fan of extreme cinema. And I will say that it is extreme. This is a movie that will make you feel very dirty. It will shock you. It will repulse you. It's a movie that's very offensive. It's a movie that sticks its middle finger up at the PC crowd. It's a movie that sticks its finger up at the mega budget studios who can find their directors and tell them what to do. This is a rebellious horror film, and the rebellion is coming through with the sheer frustration that Joe Begos manages to create in this hellish descent into a complete living nightmare that this main character is going through. And so I really appreciated, because it wasn't limited to anything. It wasn't pulling any punches. It wasn't, it wasn't going to stay in the confines of safety. And these are horror films that I believe need to be rewarded. Is because for independent cinema, it is a blessing that these mega budget studios don't tell them what to do, is because they have free range to go to any lengths that they want. And Joe Begos really takes you to lengths that's going to test your capacity for what you're able to stomach. And this is a very disgusting kind of film. The overall visuals are very neon light style. It's a very sleazy atmosphere. There is graphic sex, there's graphic violence, there's hardcore drug use, and so it's everything that is, as I said, sticking the middle finger up to the PC crowd. This is a straight out gory extreme horror film, and the gory extreme nature of this film will actually repulse a lot of people, and that's exactly what this director wants. And I believe that this is exactly what the director executed to absolute perfection. This is a journey that the viewer is going to go on with this main character. I thought the main character was played very well by the actress. She was just the desperation. You could sense the desperation. The desperation was coming through the screen, and it was just engulfing the viewer and making the viewer feel very uncomfortable. But it's definitely a film that's very fast-paced. It's not a movie that's very subtle. It's going to hit you over the head with a sledgehammer, and it's going to leave you twitching in a pile of your own blood. And so that's the type of experience you get. It's a heavy metal sort of punk film where it's going to really hit you really, really fast, and it's relentless, and it's just a movie that's going to be exhausting to the point of by the time it finishes, you're going to think to yourself, wow, I was not expecting this movie to be quite this extreme. So as I said, it's got graphic sex, graphic nudity, it's got hardcore drugs, and I thought the practical gore effects were absolutely phenomenal. And to add to that sense of frustration, the sense of rebellion, I thought the overall the underlying message of creative frustration I thought was there, and it symbolized what she was going through. It symbolized the whole film, that sort of frustration that the whole film seems to have in that it's venting it out, as I said, with creative block. Is that this this main character, she didn't know what to do as far as her piece was concerned, and she was becoming very angry. And so the whole film has that sense of anger in its heart, and the anger is just pounding the viewer over and over and over. And so that was something, again, that I really appreciated, is that it was a psychological kind of film. And so not only are you going through the process that this main character is going through, but it has something to do, as I said, with that creative block. And so on one hand, it's a horror film, but on the other hand, it's a symbolisation of pure frustration. And that frustration comes out, and it just makes a horror film that is definitely worth going through the 80-minute runtime that it is. If I have a problem with Bliss, is that it's more a case of experiencing it as opposed to actually delving into the characters. The overall story and the character itself is very simplistic, and it doesn't really go anywhere, but it's just the descent, it's the experience of the descent and the way that the descent is told. I thought the way the story of a woman losing her mind was told was really, really well done. There's shades of Gaspar Noé, there's shades of Lars von Trier, there's shades of all these other really extreme directors out there that are in the mix in this movie that just tell you a story through the vivid imagery that's able to come through and just put the viewer into the shoes of those that are actually suffering these horrible events. And so it's a movie that also reminded me of grindhouse cinema, cinema of the 80s. And so there's so much nostalgia to this film. That's just a really added bonus. It's icing on the cake in what was just, as I said, a really fast-paced and a very hardcore horror film that I'm so happy that I took the time and effort to watch. It's got a heavy metal sort of screechy soundtrack that once again emulated all that frustration that the movie's about. And so I just really appreciate it for what it was. It's a very simplistic film. Some people say it's a little bit too simplistic, but for me, it's about the experience, and it's that horror experience that I think that Joe Begos really understands that makes him a director to be really, really excited about. So I believe that this is his best film yet, and as a result of that, I'm going to give Bliss 4 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.